Good day to all. Welcome to Straight Talk with Greg Middleton. My name is Alexandra. With this introduction, here is Greg.
A good day to everyone, and welcome back to Straight Talk. Last week we had Dale on with just his biography, but today we really want to concentrate on the nuts and bolts of why he's here. Dale has one of those smart minds, and I'm going to extract as much as I can out of him while he's in here for the next 30 minutes. Our segment today is more covering what Dale had labeled, he called it anti-literacy laws and efforts. So after a brief prayer, I want to give Dale a few minutes just to set this stage for us. So you mind if I pray first, David?
Sure, go on.
Dear Lord, please guide us. Send your Holy Spirit right here amongst us, that whatever we say, whatever we do, may it be inspire someone to want to know more, to serve God better, to just become a better person. And we ask all this in the mighty name of Christ Jesus. Amen? Okay, we've been prayed up, Dale. We're ready to go now.
Okay.
Now tell me about this anti-literacy and law efforts. Explain to me what that big old title says.
Okay. For 300 of the 400 years blacks have been in this country, the first 300 plus years were in an environment where the system was set up against blacks being literate.
Okay.
So I call it the anti-literacy
That's
period.
a term.
And examples, there were laws that were actually put in place. For example, in Virginia, there was a law that basically said that if a child in a school was learning to read, that school would be dismissed, and each of the youngsters would receive 20 lashes.
This in a black school.
Any school.
Any school?
Any school.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
They were prevented from teaching blacks to learn to read and write. In Louisiana, they went a step further. And the law, in the anti-literacy law in Louisiana said that on the first instance, if, and this was in Sunday school,
Okay.
that if a child was being taught to read, that they would be fined $50, $500.
Wow.
The second case, if that was a second occurrence, then that child could be put to death.
The child?
Yes.
I assume the teacher too, huh?
Well, they didn't talk about the teacher.
Okay. Okay.
Because in some instances, the teachers, some whites took the risk of teaching blacks how to read.
Now, Dale, you're saying this is something written in the books, in the law books.
Yes.
So, I mean, we're not making this stuff up.
No.
Wow.
For those that might be interested, they can get in touch with you, and we
Okay.
can give them documents that anyone can go and see for themselves where these laws existed.
So people wonder why so many blacks are still poor to this day and uneducated, because that was done to us. We didn't do that.
Right.
That was done to us by law.
Right, by law.
By law.
By law.
It's kind of. Go
The
ahead.
other interesting thing is that not only was education not valued except for the aristocrats, and which is, I think, the reason why there are no provisions in the Constitution, no reference or even notes or any reference made to education in the Constitution.
Right.
And so for the average person, there was no intention of them being educated.
Wow.
Originally, fourth grade education was all that was needed, because the only thing that poor people needed to do would be able to read and write and compute.
And that's enough.
That's enough.
Oh, God.
Okay. And,
No profession, not just read and write, and then go to work.
And go to work.
Wow.
And so universal education didn't really surface until after the Civil War, during the Reconstruction period, when blacks were legislators.
Wow.
They were the ones that pushed universal education.
Well, tell me this. During the whole slavery time up until, 1865? When was the Emancipation Proclamation? Was that
Actually, it was 1863.
1863. So blacks were not allowed to go to school during that whole slave period, or were they allowed to do church schools, or how did that do? Are you familiar with?
It depended upon the region.
Okay.
There were some blacks that were being educated in some of the northern states.
Right. Okay.
But generally, because the masses of blacks were in the South,
Right.
where slaves,
Right.
slavery existed, and so the system said we need an uneducated population.
Ooh. Intentionally.
Intentionally.
Wow.
And in fact, Senator Vartman of Mississippi specifically made the statement, and we can give anyone the references so that they can go check it out for themselves.
Right.
He made the statement that educating the black man simply rendered him unfit for the jobs that whites had prescribed for him.
Wow.
And that
it kind of ruined
Right.
a work hand.
Right. And
Wow.
that all it did was to make a maid an insolent cook.
Right. Right. More belligerent.
Right.
Right.
And so during that same period, there was a college that was going to be established, a black college going to be established in Clarksdale, Mississippi. The large plantation owners forced that college to be moved to Cleveland
Okay.
so that blacks would not have the opportunity to look for alternatives other than to work on the plantations.
Right.
They
So
would
they
not-
moved from Mississippi to Cleveland. Is the Mississippi you talking about?
Right,
Cleveland.
in Cleveland, Mississippi.
Okay.
And it was Delta State,
Oh, okay.
which that college still exists.
Oh.
And so that college was moved from its original location that was supposed to be built in Clarksdale to Cleveland so that blacks would not have any options other than working menial labor.
Well, and thinking about the history of black people and education, and you said the federal government was not allowed to fund us in any kind of way. We didn't depend on
No,
them.
not allowed. There was no role defined for the federal government in the Constitution.
Oh, I see. It wasn't written in the Constitution.
Right. So, and that was a court case that went all the way to the Supreme Court.
Okay.
It's called Cummings versus the Richmond County Board of Education.
Okay.
And it resulted from a black school close to Augusta, Georgia,
Okay.
being closed, the only black school being closed. Yet they kept 3 white high schools open.
Right.
And so the court case said that was a violation of Plessy versus Ferguson, which said that separate but equal was okay.
Plessy versus Ferguson is separate but equal. That's
Right.
it. Okay.
That
Go
was the court. That was the
Right.
thing before Brown versus Board of Education.
ahead. Wait a minute. Did you say separate but equal?
Right,
That's what they called it?
right. It was Plessy versus Ferguson that the Supreme Court said that it was okay to segregate as long as you have separate but equal.
But was it ever equal?
No, and that was
Come on.
and that was the court case, the
Oh,
Cummings
okay.
case.
Okay.
The Cummings case said that was a violation of Plessy versus Ferguson.
Oh.
The Supreme Court ruled that it was okay for the state, for the Richmond Board of Education, to close the black school and keep the white schools open because there was no role for the federal government to play since education was a state responsibility.
But what did they want to do with the black people once they closed the black schools? You couldn't go to the white school.
To leave them, to not provide
Not
education.
educate them at all.
Right, not to provide that opportunity. and looking at the same thing, black schools in the South, blacks had to come up with the money or the wherewithal to establish schools because the South said we don't have funds to pay for a dual education system. And so blacks are the only group that had to come up with money to establish buildings for blacks to have schools.
And how did we do that? Was it through churches or how was
Churches
it?
played an important role.
Okay.
But also white philanthropists
Oh, okay.
donated money. White, especially United Methodist Church, some of the religious institutions
Mm-hmm.
Provided funds to help build the churches.
Mm-hmm.
But also Booker T. Washington and Julius Rosenwald,
Mm-hmm.
who was the CEO for Sears Roebuck,
Mm-hmm.
established the Rosenwald Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And they,
About what years were those?
This was in
Booker
the,
T. Washington era.
around 1914, 1913,
Okay,
but
okay.
the first part of the 19th century.
Oh, okay, okay.
And so,
W.E.B. Du Bois was around then.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
and so the Rosenwald Foundation established the first black school in Lee County in Alabama,
Mm-hmm.
which is close to Tuskegee.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And because that's where Booker T. Washington was.
Right, right.
So blacks had to come up with private money or donate out of their pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And so you had many schools that were housed in churches until they were come up with enough money
Mm-hmm.
to build a separate building.
Mm-hmm.
So you had a church,
Uh-huh.
a school building, and a graveyard. Because
All on
that
the
was,
same-
That was the common.
Educate them and bury them at the same
Right.
place.
But also-
I'm sorry.
That was the only community
Uh-huh.
property
Uh-huh.
that blacks had in a lot of communities.
Mm-hmm. With churches?
Right.
Right.
And for a personal experience,
Mm-hmm.
the school that I went to, until I reached the 7th grade,
Okay.
the school was not owned by the school district. It was owned by Stout Lumber Company.
Was South Lumber Company owned by white people?
It was a large, it was a family that had lots of money.
Okay.
And in fact, in Iowa, Stout University still exists
Wow.
by the Stout family.
Wow.
And they believed in providing education because they had a sawmill
Mm-hmm.
in Thornton,
Mm-hmm.
which was the economic engine
Right.
for that town
Mm-hmm.
until it burned. But they saw the need to build a school
Mm-hmm.
and provide the building and pay to bring a principal in
Mm-hmm.
and pay for that and not have the school district
Wow.
because the school district wouldn't do it.
It's kind of totally amazing because we couldn't have advanced hardly at all had it not been for some sympathetic whites, like the Underground Railroad and a lot of things that we never could have just done this all by ourselves. That's why I don't ever propagate hate,
Right.
and especially not racism hate. You hate somebody just because they're this color, which is what they do to us. Just because we're black, we are inferior. And I don't know where this hate comes from. Because you seem like they would love us because we're doing all the work. Yeah.
But in some cases, it's economic and power
Mm-hmm.
out of fear that that person is going to usurp my authority and power.
Mm-hmm.
And as in the case with Mandela,
Mm-hmm.
when he became president, one of the fears that a large percentage of the white population in South Africa had
Right.
was that he was going to retaliate because of the cruelness
Right.
of the people.
Of course.
So when people are cruel to others,
Mm-hmm.
and the other people then reach the point where they can
Right.
reciprocate, there's fear that that's going to happen.
Right.
When in many cases that doesn't happen, especially when the tables are turned.
Well, it kind of reminded me of today. I mean, this whole bigotry around the Trump supporters and stuff like that. They are afraid that we're going to retaliate against them because apparently the all-white population is shrinking, isn't it?
Yes.
And people of color are getting larger because once you go an ounce of color and you can't go back all white. So they're afraid of losing their privilege, unearned privileges. Is that what you would say?
That's part of it.
So is fear-based more than hate-based?
Fear and power.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Let's bring this up into our situation here because I'm trying to figure out how can we improve our people through collective community. It seems like we got to start with the mindset. Would you think?
Yes. Let me give you 2 examples.
Okay.
Black Wall Street.
Okay.
People don't
Oklahoma?
look at that model and how it was created.
Okay.
A second example is the Harlem Renaissance.
Okay.
You're talking about a group of people in Harlem
Mm-hmm.
who, at the end of slavery, had nothing
Right.
and created something
Right. Out of nothing.
out of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so the ability to do that is always there.
Right.
It's just a matter of how do you organize it in such a way that you convince people that they have the ability to do so.
Right. Right.
And so that comes from people getting together and sharing talent and expertise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and that brings up the subject too, since during all of the days of slavery, we were forbidden to get together and, coming together in groups and try to organize things. They forbid us from doing that, right? So everything we did had to be under the currents, and we survived, and we did. In fact, it's so funny. Everything they threw at our race, we survived, and I think that's one of the things they feared too, because given an opportunity, we would really excel. So I think that's one of the fear-based things too, because we would be their competition.
Right.
And like you said, it's all about power. You mean? And that's why I think at this point that we should focus more on how can we unify. I think just about every race in this country unifies and comes together. But since we were disenfranchised or split apart, we got to re-educate our minds to accept coming together, wouldn't you say?
Well, I think we have to first know the reasons why we're in the predicament that we're in.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And if you don't know what the problem is, you can't really solve it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and let's just take again, many people, and I'm one of them, believe that the educational institutions in this country are not designed to educate, but to socialize.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Is that both overall white and black?
yes.
Education,
Yes,
period. Okay.
right.
Okay.
And so, if we don't know how education is being misinterpreted
Right.
and mislabeled, then we really can't solve it. And
Right.
give you just an example. George Washington Carver
Mm-hmm.
is considered to have been one of the greatest scientists in this country.
Right. Right.
And but he was also a good teacher.
I didn't know that.
But he used the Socratic method.
What's Socratic?
Socratic means that you don't get students simply to recall
Okay.
and regurgitate what's information that's given to them.
And that's basically how we learn. We just memorize something and regurgitate it, but we
No.
don't know what we're doing.
Right.
Okay.
And so that's not
Okay.
true learning, because you can't be a problem solver
Right.
if you don't understand it.
Right. Right.
The other thing is to really learn and comprehend something, you have to be able to visualize another language.
Right.
And so if I say to you, what comes to mind if I say McDonald's, then you get a mental picture. That
Right.
word generates a picture.
Right. Right.
So the symbolism that we use in education, those symbols and words ought to generate a picture in the minds of students.
But
So-
that's not how students
So
are
that's
taught.
not how it's done.
Right.
And so as a result, kids learn the rules, and particularly in math, they don't see the value of it because they don't have a mental picture of what
Right.
all of those crazy symbols represent.
Right. Right. Right.
And so, and they don't have the language to accompany it. And so, as a result, we simply give information, and we retain it long enough to pass it on an exam, and then it's gone.
I noticed on your resume that you spent a lot of years in education, but also in administration, right?
Right.
And I suppose you met with the board and drafting programs, curriculums on learning, correct? Did you ever give them your ideas that you should teach them how to fish as opposed to fixing a fish sandwich?
I'll give you a personal experience.
Okay.
We did a math reading demonstration program that was
Okay.
funded by the state.
Okay.
It was successful.
Mm-hmm.
We took the bottom quartile
Mm-hmm.
of students at a junior high school,
Okay.
and we were able to get them to progress on an average of 2 years for each year they were in the program.
Mm-hmm.
It became a model for the state of California.
Oh, okay.
And we did workshops explaining to other school districts
Mm-hmm.
the techniques that we were using.
Right, right.
We never did a workshop for the teachers and staff in Pasadena Unified School District where we were located.
So you have this program that proven to work, but it was never implemented?
It was never implemented in Pasadena
Okay.
where it was housed.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons
Mhm.
was that it required the teachers to do something that was different than what they
Uh-huh.
were normally
Right.
expected to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing was that we're talking about a period right after the just preceding the forced desegregation by the
Right.
courts,
Mm-hmm.
that you're talking about white teachers taking instruction from a
Right.
black man.
Uh-huh. God forbid, huh?
And so
yeah. Mm-hmm.
that didn't go over very well.
Well, yeah, it's so complicated that we have all this manure mixed in our need to educate. I mean, we've got to work through prejudice, all these side things that we can't really educate because we're not together as a people. We don't have a common cause.
But I think the other thing is we have to acknowledge the fact that the system
Mm-hmm.
still has embedded within it
It's broken.
a lot of the anti-literacy
Right.
things that it was built upon to begin with. Give you an example. Pre-algebra
Right.
didn't come about until after the 1954 Supreme Court decision.
Mm-hmm.
Pre-algebra, prior to that, was 8th grade arithmetic, and you went from 8th grade arithmetic directly into Algebra 1.
Okay. Okay.
So 8th grade arithmetic was not a high school course.
Okay.
But by changing the name of it to pre-algebra, now you can offer a watered-down class, less than algebra, as a high school class.
Okay.
And so that was in Pasadena. There were times when at the high school, you could have as many as 8 or 9 classes below Algebra 1 that students could get math credit for.
Wow.
And they were filled with people of color, kids of color.
You know, in fact, we only have about 5 minutes left. And what is the history of education as you see it today? Are we getting better? I don't see any hell of a lot of improvement. It seems like everything's just, people throw money at programs, but they don't fix nothing, you know?
Programs don't work, people do.
Right.
And to me, one of the missing pieces in present day education
Okay.
is that it's centered on giving information to students, not teaching them, but
Right.
giving information. They're dispensing information.
So you just pass this requirement, you get a degree, and you move, and you don't know nothing.
Right. You don't really understand.
Right, right.
And is that responsible for the large number of foreign names that we see when we look at professionals that are coming into
Right.
medicine,
Right.
science, and so
Right,
forth?
right.
They have foreign names, which means there are persons
We're not doing it.
that may be coming from outside of the country, and we're not doing a lot with our.
Well, you know, we complain so much about what other countries are doing or are not doing, but we're not doing anything ourselves in this country. I mean, I think this is the most hypocritical country on the planet, quite frankly. I mean, I'm not trying to be downcasting, but this is not what they say it is. You mean, it's proclaimed to be the city on a hill, a noble place, you know, land of the brave and the free, but everything that we were taught about this country, it's almost not real. You mean, we were on the brunt of it, so we can say, no, it's not fair. You mean, but they say it is. Even to this day, they talk about this critical race theory. They don't want you to teach something to the white kids to make them feel bad. Is that what this basically is?
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
That's not new.
Right. Well, we have felt bad all these years.
No, but I had that experience as director of the desegregation program back in the 70s,
Oh, okay.
where sensitivity training, as it was called then,
Oh, yeah, okay.
and that was a no-no
Mm-hmm.
because many of the white participants in that sensitivity training felt bad. because when you're talking about what whites did,
Right.
they felt guilty,
Right.
even though they were not actual
Right.
participants.
Of course.
But they associated themselves with.
How do we get beyond those barriers that keep us apart? Because see, I've talked to a number of pastors on this show. I said, well, look, guys, why aren't we, the church, dealing with racism? Because we believe in God and fairness and equality and all this stuff, and God stands for all that. So we have power to stand on God and fight racism.
But I think if you go back and look at the beginning of higher education in this country, it was based on division. Harvard, Yale, Brown, those were all schools advocating a special denomination. And so when one college seminary was established, the others didn't want that one to get the jump on them.
Right.
So they established their own. And so from the beginning we had the division, in my estimation. But how do you overcome that? And I think Dr. King said it, and I'll paraphrase what he said.
Okay.
He basically said that we hate each other because we don't know each other.
I like that.
We don't know each other because we're separated.
Right.
And so, and because we're separated, we can't communicate.
Well, you know, this time has gone by too fast. We barely touched the surface. We have less than a minute here. Are you optimistic about the history of education in this country?
I think it has to change.
Okay.
And I think it will.
Do they need to gut it and start back up somehow?
No, I think all the pieces are there.
Okay.
But you have some competing elements that I think do damage to it.
Okay.
And to me, teaching is a person-to-person relationship
Right.
that makes it important. Many students will learn, not because they see the value in what they're learning, but because of the relationship that they have with the teacher, and they
Right.
don't want to disappoint
Right.
the teacher. A lot of the discipline problems result as a result of the lack of a relationship that exists between teachers and students, or
Right.
educators and students. And I'll never forget one example. There was a vandalism that occurred at Blair High School. They vandalized all of the classrooms and skipped over one classroom.
Okay.
They skipped over that one classroom because of the relationship that teacher had with the students. And they said, you don't bother his classroom.
Right. That was like teachers, the students respected that teacher.
That's right.
So they protected that teacher.
That's right. But also, because of that respect and that relationship that teacher had with the students would not allow other students
Right.
to vandalize his classroom.
Well, Dale, we're flat out of time here, and we barely touched the surface. I'm going to have to get you back because, see, this is so deep. And you and I are talking about how can we build a community and like-minded people so we can advance this conversation. We need to start somewhere, and we're getting older. But we need that younger group up under us to take this torch and start. But we got to train them to do this. Yeah. But like I said, we're flat out of time. And Dale, thank you so much. I hope this has been helpful for some people. And thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure.
All right.